As Christian mentioned, I'm Patrick Osterhaus. I'm CTO for Protera. Really appreciate you dialing in today, learning a little bit about our offering Protera FlexBridge and talking about how we can help migrate you from your on-premise or cloud solution, if you're already in cloud, over to HANA on AWS. We have a Q&A available on the webinar, so feel free to pop in your questions there. Hopefully, Christian, keep me honest. I may not see the Q&A when they pop up, so if we don't get them during the webinar, we'll certainly address them at the end of the webinar. So feel free to pop your questions in there, and I'll make sure we get them answered by the end. So what we want to talk about here today is a very high-level agenda. We wanted to talk about how you want to start with looking at your current environment and what should be important to review when you go to HANA. So there's considerations for SAP requirements, as well as considerations if you're going to move to the cloud for the first time. So we're going to take a scan at that. We're going to look at how you can get to HANA as well as the cloud. So a lot of options out there in the market. And we think that we came up with a better solution. So we're going to talk to how we do that within Protera FlexBridge. And a couple weeks ago at Sapphire, some very exciting announcements from AWS and also one of our partners, SUSE, on the operating system level. So we'll talk about those in this presentation just to make everyone aware of some key capabilities that you can bring on HANA for AWS. And then lastly, we'll finish up with a case study to give you some real captured results that a customer has had moving to HANA on AWS using FlexBridge. So we'll go through those. So I won't spend a lot of time on the introduction, but I think it's really important for everyone to have an understanding of our experience and what we bring to the table for what's been built into the product. And what we like to talk about with the Protera company is our focus around what we call AppCare on-demand platform. And this is a product and a solution that we've built over many years that encapsulates all the needs an SAP customer would have. So this talks to the solution whole for SAP, for the cloud solution, as well as managing the SAP application itself, any third-party products that tie into that solution, as well as all of the managed services that deliver that application to your customer. So we have, you can see on the top here, the people and expertise. That's our certifications from SAP. We have 5 certifications that are global certs from SAP. And we also have our Amazon Web Services certification, which we stay very attuned to where Amazon technology is going, and we try our best to innovate with all their new solutions so we can bring those to the table as soon as they expand a new offering in cloud. We want to bring that to our SAP customers. And with those certifications, we bundle that with our IT learnings. We have ITIL foundations. All of our associates, all of our specialists are trained in that methodology right from when they're hired. And that is all brought back into our help desk, which we call our AppCare Service Center. We have centers that are around the world. It's global 24/7. And those will fully support from the lowest level of the cloud. You can talk about ping power pipe, which is taken care of in AWS already. So we work with AWS for that level, all the way to OS, the application, up to DR, HA, any of those more complicated implementation scenarios we will fully support and design for you. So just a lot on the sheet. We don't have to go through all the parts, but it's in essence the platform is all the capabilities that we built over the years that are delivered as a subscription for our customers. A little bit about our presence. So we talked about the AppCare Service Centers. You can see those shown up here in orange. We have 2 in North America. There's a service center in Mexico. Our headquarters, where I'm at today, is in Chicago, Illinois. We have a large service center in Europe, Athens, Greece, and then also in Hyderabad, India. So again, 24/7 follow the sun support for any of our largest customers' requirements. Now we'll add all these red dots are data centers, so enabling the AWS data centers around the world. I know they're constantly being lit up, so there's more capabilities here. So this is to put your data as close as you need to be for your customer. So we can support anywhere there's an AWS data center, we can fully support putting an SAP system there. A term that you may have heard of in the marketplace the last few years is cloud brokering, and I think that's a really good description of what we provide for the market. We will take the clouds and integrate on-premise to any cloud, and then we'll bring our SAP certification capabilities on top of that. So as you can see on the right side, our 5 certs I've mentioned already, global certs from SAP, as well as our partnership with Amazon Web Services and SUSE, to go to market. And as mentioned in that previous slide, all the management platform, which includes, I didn't mention, we have the service desk for support tickets, but we also have all the automation, auto correction of problems, and then the monitoring and backups and all the security capabilities with antivirus and patching and such is all built within our solution. So we talked that those previous slides talked more about the operations, the day-to-day care and feeding of systems and solutions. This slide talks more to the capabilities of the deployment, from the purchase of the SAP license all the way to going to deployment, running, and operations. So we can help on the design side. So architecture design, sizing, proof-of-concept systems, which we'll talk about here shortly in this webinar. We can talk through all those scenarios. We have many, many years going back to the early 90s with SAP and previous for other technologies for doing design and architecture and solutioning. We can help in that area, as well as the deploying. So we're going to talk today about this key part with migration. We can also help in the implementation and the testing area for getting SAP deployed to run there in the last portion on the cloud. So optimizing, making sure your workload's running in a very fast manner, as well as predicting and capacity planning for the future. And also looking at more complicated scenarios such as DR and HA, and with AWS taking advantage of those multi-zone capabilities. So we can help architect and solution those. So let's talk a little bit about going to HANA. So we'll change gears here, and you're all probably interested in what you should be looking at for HANA. Fortunately, there's a lot of information. So much information, it's hard to exactly know where you should start. So one of the challenges we saw here is trying to assimilate all this information and get the most important factors to start looking at if your systems can go to HANA. So within the first few steps within the assessment is looking at what we call the migration risk profile. So this would consider, much like any other past upgrade, if you've done for SAP, is looking how much custom coding you've done, how many modifications are in the system, the version of SAP, and the applications that you're currently running, for example, apparel and footwear, and making sure that that runs within the target system of HANA and ultimately S4. So we do a mapping to make sure we're considering any areas of SAP that might not be supported or fully designed for that new platform. That's a big consideration. The target system sizing. We're going to take a look in next few slides about what's fully supported for versioning, and this helps look at is your version supported, as well as the sizing of that. One of the exciting factors that companies are hoping to capture with HANA is that their footprint's going to go down, and we're seeing roughly probably about 40%, where you see 40% of that original footprint will go down in storage size, at least when you go to HANA. And it'll be even smaller when we go to S4. But those are all considerations because we want to make sure we size the equipment properly, but also we don't want the customer overpaying also for resources they don't need. So it's really important that we start looking at that assessment from the get-go of any risk and considerations we want to do for making sure it's going to be a good migration. And then there's a litany of SAP notes that have to be followed, the system prep that's required, as well as benchmarking, looking at how long it's going to take, estimating downtime, estimating any cluster tables, if you've done a Unicode conversion or not. If a Unicode conversion has not happened, that cluster table migration can take weeks on itself to run those programs. So it's really important that we look at that and assess any areas that need remediation before we start looking at the migration, because it could certainly impact your end-to-end migration time if there's a certain weekend that you're targeting if you don't run those programs early enough. So I like this slide because it's really surprising how back SAP is enabling customers to move to HANA. They're doing a wonderful job opening up more and more old versions. It's surprising here that now 4.6c is now supported to go directly to HANA. So right now 4.7 isn't. Perhaps in the future they've opened 4.6. You can see ECC 5. Obviously, making that big of a jump could be technically supported to go to HANA. There could be a lot of functional changes. So that's something to be considered. And we'll talk about some of the remediation that FlexBridge offers in that very soon. But it's encouraging that SAP is offering a very large ramp, or a launch pad, let's say, to go to HANA from a lot of source versions. So it is encouraging. We also have the roadmap here, the versions that are supported for SRM, CRM, and SCM, the remaining business suite solutions. You can see here, there is some systems that are not supported. For example, CRM 5.0, that you have to get to that 7.0 version of NetWeaver. So some qualifications there. So the tool is going to check all these portions, just make sure that you got a fully supported migration path, as well as for BW. And again, you see that 7.0. It's really important that you're beyond support package 17 to make the jump.
Hey, Pat, this is Christian. Just a question that came in, I think we can maybe tackle now. Are these older releases supported on any database, or are there some limitations or some issues we should be aware of?
That's a good question. It's so to answer the question fully, I'm gonna have to sneak a little ahead in what we're gonna talk about, how we do the migration. So I'll just talk briefly about that. The tools that we utilize for FlexBridge to do migrations is based on DMO. So that you can see up here in the top, DMO as database migration option. That tool set has a very wide source database and operating system platform that you can run it on. I was really surprised. We talked to a prospect a few weeks ago, and OS 390 is supported now within that tool set. So it's very wide. Specifically, if there's a combination that you are interested, we could certainly follow up and make sure it's supported, but it is very wide. It's Unix, OS 390. Top of my head, I cannot remember if AS400 is supported by DMO for a source. And then going to the targets, pretty much any more recent version of HANA running on SUSE as the OS. So if you have a specific combination, if you want to enter it in the Q&A, I'm happy to answer that if I know it. But it's very wide, the amount of supported operating systems and databases to use as a source. So we'll talk a little bit about these deployments and how to get there. There's a lot of information that we could talk to on migration options. So this first slide here, and we have a few that are going to map out this a little more specifically about the migrations we'll talk about today. But in general, so advanced analytics, faster, real-time decision-making, the performance capabilities and gains, for the business suite in general. So, and probably the most important one, I think, the adoption that's driving people looking at it too is, to get to S4. To get to S4, you have to go through HANA. So that driver of why are we doing HANA? Is it for taking an existing business suite and migrating the data, which is what we're talking to today, taking an existing system and move it, to HANA? So that path is going to be on the lower leg here, the existing SAP applications. And so if we look at that, then we, there's a lot of value we can capture with this migration. This is an opportunity if you're looking at a hardware refresh, if you're on-premise, this is when you can move it to cloud. This is another opportunity, to do that migration, not only for the cloud, but to migrate or to upgrade SAP. So you upgrade to the most recent version of SAP with the HANA version, as well as capturing Unicode if needed. So we see some companies doing what I would consider, hopping in a couple steps, where they first move to cloud. So they just basically block by block, migrate by block over to AWS, go to the cloud, and then they do the migration to HANA. One of the things that I'd like to introduce an idea in this presentation is you could do all those steps in one migration. So you can do this OSDB migration where you go from Unix, say, or Windows, jump to SUSE with HANA on AWS, and even do the Unicode all in one fell swoop. So there's many options here, and it really is a business decision. Risk has to be analyzed, and also the timing of it. All these considerations of what the best approach is for that customer. All are good options. It probably makes, what makes the most sense for business. But I think that the big main point about FlexBridge is it enables a company to do all these moves at once if that's preferred. And so only one round of regression testing, only only one project instead of splitting out the unit code migration or cloud migration. We can nail all of them at the same time. So what we talked about here, this path here with the existing SAP applications, we talk about OSDB migration as well as lift and shift. Lift and shift is essentially just copying those bytes over, and there's many tools in the market. We've used many of them to migrate from on-premise over to Amazon. So there are some solutions that are available to just move to cloud, doing the platform shift. So considerations here, just to cover a little bit more off these details, is how could we do that? And the migration options, there's a litany, amount of options that SAP even provides. So you can do system copies where there's tools where you can export that database and export to a NAS device and then take that NAS device and import it into the target system. Or you could even do a backup and restore. So you could take a hot backup even, and if you have a fast enough network connection, you could connect the data over the network and copy it and restore the database and have a very minimal outage of downtime. And we're talking specifically just on lift and shift migrations here on the top. You could also do, set up a DR. So you would replicate that production system as a DR system. You basically seed that target, and then you replicate it, and then you turn off the source, and then you're migrated. It's a little more setup, but it provides a very little outage for downtime, which is a nice value. And as I mentioned before, the third-party tools, they provide block by block, almost full hypervisor copy to move to AWS. So those are all very good options if you want to go that route. The OSDB migration, which we're going to talk about in more detail here in the next few slides, the options are, you can do what we mentioned before, DMO, which is what FlexBridge uses, which brings a lot of very advanced features to migration, as well as you can use SAP's classic migration, which basically uses that export import. And with that, you go to a NAS device, you look at a larger downtime. It's usually not recommended to do for production systems because the outage could be up to a couple days. So this would be more for proof of concepts, it would be our recommendation. For those lift and shift to AWS, some of the considerations here, again, sizing is a big consideration. The connectivity, where we see a lot of customers going to AWS for copies, they'll actually use a VPN connection, which is sufficient. For production moves, for very large systems, we might want to look at more of a direct connection. So MPLS might be considered, especially if it's sort of a foregone conclusion. If you're going to cloud, you're going to want to have that connection already. So the connectivity will probably already be established from that company to cloud. And then, we mentioned the production downtime, always a consideration. So what choice you're going to pick for migration is going to be selected highly on the downtime to minimize that. And then obviously you want to test it and make sure the interfaces are working, and should probably put in their printing also. That's a big key consideration moving. A few more things. We talked about the export import, just additional considerations. And the other portion here that's on the bottom is the bolt-on and add-ons to make sure that they're compatible. If you're doing OSDB migration from Windows to SUSE, for example, got to make sure Vertex is supported on SUSE, and how you transfer that data might be a little different. Instead of doing, an SFTP to Windows, you might be able to just rsync copy it on SUSE, for example. So looking at those new operating systems you're moving to, there might be some better options for how you can, do interfaces. So it should be considered. So with all that said, with outages and consideration for migration upgrades, what we see is, a lot of challenges in that space. We've been doing migrations for over 20 years, and we've done some really incredibly challenging ones in military databases, data centers, I should say, where getting the NAS itself was very, very complicated and tedious process. So we saw internally in our team the need that we can create a tool that we can automate this process and something that we can reproduce the results over and over fast. So when we looked at the OSDB migration specifically, we focused upon creating a tool set that can encapsulate a best practice approach that we would always use. So these migration considerations, part of it is to automate and improve the migration itself. The other part is to help us with the preparation phase, which is lengthy and considerably challenging in and of itself, where we need an expert that goes to on-site for a week and assesses the environment. So with these migration considerations, that's what we look at when we are looking at FlexBridge. It's not just to do the migration itself, but it's the preparatory parts also. And we're going to talk about those. So the last slide here on migration options, this describes essentially the lay of the land today in SAP of how you can migrate. That first one, which might be more of an option than people think, is a reimplementation. Because if you're looking at S4, the schema is so vastly different that some companies are choosing for that S4 function, maybe they'll just stand up a new system. So that is certainly an option. I think possibly for especially for S4, maybe not so much with HANA, because with HANA you can move. I think there's good solutions now with moving the data and minimizing the downtime. And that in the past, I'll get to the answer there with the one-step migration option, number C. But for the many years before we had C, we had this class of migration, which again is you migrate it, dump it to a NAS device, then you re-import it, and then you do an upgrade. So we're talking multi-steps. Typically we'd always separate the migration to do a OSDB migration, and then we would do the upgrade in a separate weekend. So you're talking multiple steps. And then a few years ago, SAP introduced this DMO option where you can now combine the steps. So key enabler, new options, more complicated, and it also has a lot of options within itself that companies can run it. Will take them multiple steps in a migration to run it to get it to a minimum downtime. So there's a lot of new capabilities, but it's also more complicated than the A or B options. So let's talk a little bit, before we get into the migration tool set, let's talk a little bit about some of these announcements with HANA, which I think are really noteworthy, and it's opening up a lot of new customers to the AWS to run HANA. Foremost, that's the AWS X1 instance. So that is sized at 2 terabytes, and it's a massive amount of SAPs, 131,000 SAPs. So any productive SAP HANA load can be run now on this AWS instance. Sorry, I can't say that. So it's been announced. First 2 terabytes have been announced. So this gives you the capability with multi-tenant SUSE and AWS HANA systems that you can now do multi-tenant, multi-system. So you could put, within that 2 terabytes, you could put multiple SAP systems running on HANA. So it's very, very cool offering. And it's going to drive, I think, a lot of new business to run HANA on the cloud. So it's a key enabler, as well as this announcement by SUSE on the live kernel patching. So for any company that manages their own SAP systems, one of the big challenges is keeping that system current on all your patching that's required for security compliance. And so restarting that operating system alone on a large SAP database, that could be an hour in and of itself. So you're looking once a quarter, probably a 2-hour outage that you have to drive, and negotiate with the business. With this new version 12, we can do the kernel patches and those fixes without the OS reboot. And this is so new that we're testing on our team to see how it's going to affect the SAP system, and if you have to restart SAP when this happens, just to make sure that things won't change midstream in SAP. So we're still testing that, and we'll know those answers soon. Yet even if SAP has to get restarted, that restarts literally in the minutes. So we're talking, instead of it being a 2-hour outage every quarter, we're talking, let's say, 10-minute outage every quarter. So it's a key enabler. It's going to help us keep systems secure and minimize the downtime for the businesses. The other big part, if you watch the keynote from Hasso at Sapphire, he led out a little bit that the architecture of HANA itself is architected with SUSE's operating system built in, and especially around HA, which is a key component. With the cost for AWS instances of protection, you can bring HA in very, very easily and cost effectively on AWS. So they are the best in class for their their HA and their DR capabilities. So encourage you to look at that if you haven't seen that as well. This slide here just shows us all the certified sizes for instances right now currently in AWS. That last line there has the very new X1.32x large, so that has 128 virtual CPUs and 2 terabytes of memory. So it's a monster. All right, Christian, can you take a look to see if there's any more Q&A questions? I can stop here if anyone has questions. We're, I think, almost a half hour into it.
I'm monitoring the Q&A, and there are no questions, and there are no entries in the chat. So I think we're good for now.
Okay. Yep. Feel free to shoot away. Probably more will come at the end here, so we'll continue here. So let's talk about the product FlexBridge, the solution here. So you can see, I won't read off all the numbers here. Our big focus is on cost savings for migrations. Also, the main driver we're trying to minimize is that downtime, that requirement for HANA systems having to go down when they do a migration and upgrade, or moving to HANA, I should say, to do that upgrade, Unicode conversion, cloud migration, to minimize that down to a few hours, if not minutes. That's where we want to get to. So we see a mass movement to HANA and cloud, and one of the big key concerns is customers have is, they can't take their business down for a weekend to do it. I went to the HANA 2016 conference a few months ago, and there was at least three projects that they reported their progress. They're all POCs, and their downtime was over a day each. One was, I think, like 80 hours, which is really amazing. And that, obviously a business isn't going to go down for 2 days to do a migration. So there's got to be another option. They went through the A and the B option, essentially, where they import through a NAS device. So it seems like the message still, in the SAP community, that there's other options to do the migration. It's slowly getting out there. But our focus is to minimize that downtime. And then also, we want to talk about the migration quality, and I'll talk about how we enable that here in the next few slides of some of the technology we utilize. So again, we're focusing on minimizing that time, that cost, as well as we're hoping to minimize the risk in reducing complexity. So what we've been focusing upon is taking those best practices and how we have done migrations over the last 20 years. And that includes parameters that we use for running SAP, for how many processes we're going to export with, as well as do the parallel import on the other side, how we should size the network connection between those two systems, how we should do the replication with the tables. I'll talk a little bit about that in a future slide here, that how do we minimize that downtime done within some SAP tools that does replication while the system's up. So the goal is that we, like a repository switch in the old upgrades, we copy the data over to the new system while the system's still up, and then only for those tables you can't do that replication, we copy those right at the end, which is the actual true outage, for the migration. We'll talk about all these more in detail, so we'll move on here just so we can get in more detail on those pieces. But the end, let's say the whole migration plan considers all these steps. So we're going to start with the assessment, and we're going to look at this from the holistic project view, not just from the basis technical side. So looking at what has to be considered in the project plan. This would consider the life cycle. So we're going to do dev and then quality. We'll do dev let me backtrack. Our best recommendation is we actually do copy of production first, and then we'll look at dev, and then possibly another copy of production to optimize that run to get the downtime down to close to zero, and then we'll do the production system. Some companies are wanting to do more production copy runs. That's just fine. So we go through that project plan design there. Within that first run of prod copy in running on HANA, there'll be a lot of feedback from the customer. So we consider that. They might consider that they want to go and do an S4 extension. So they might want to put in S4 finance, for example. And in that point, we would bring in an implementation partner, one that we've worked with, or if the customer chooses one that they have already. And we can integrate their plan to put that functionality into this larger plan for the migration itself. So there could be some large change within that plan design within just a few weeks when we start that process.
Hey Pat, Christian here. Just a quick question. How much of the work is done on-site versus remote?
So our preference is to do it remote to deliver it. If the customer needs meetings on site to help with some of the requirements gathering, our tool doesn't require us to be on site, but we certainly are open to being there if it helps the migration and the overall project plan. So none's required, but we are certainly willing to travel and go on site to see a customer.
And there is a follow-up question on that. You mentioned earlier that we have a presence globally. Would we travel globally for this kind of migration project?
I'd certainly say yes. So for the actual, I think that to be on site is probably during that design phase. During the execution, the way that we run the migrations, I'll get a little more into detail on the steps and how that actually works. But during the migration itself, it wouldn't be just one person do that migration. We have a team that the migration team that's focused upon that migration that companies, all the migrations they have. So we'd have a group of people that would work out of our AppCare service centers that would manage that. But certainly, we could travel internationally. We already do to work on migration projects. Certainly open to doing that.
Thank you, Pat. At this point, we have no additional questions.
All right. Good questions. Keep them up. So the execution, I'll talk a little more in the future step of what's actually happening. And then the error correction, also we'll talk a little more about that, some interest in how that works. And then lastly, the reporting. And that's essentially, the report, the summary report of what the customer has lit up. This is an area that we're, like I said before about the apparel and footwear. Right now, that's a product that's being heavily updated by SAP. So our hope would be that is in our reporting, we will work with functional partners that will describe fully what the solution is that they're putting into HANA. So you would basically get an upgrade report that describes the new functionality that we can deliver to the business. So we're continuing to build out that reporting as we light up new areas. So jumping into the first deliverable here is the assessment report. And the important thing to think about here is in those prior steps and those slides, we talked about considerations such as the versioning and the OSS notes, what's the hardware that's running, how many servers are part of that solution, and what other, it's ECC as a BI, what other, other component systems SAP that the customer has live. That's what this assessment report is going to consider. It's going to look at all those systems that could be HANA upgraded, or maybe there's systems that is with BI, maybe that system is going to go away. Maybe it's going to be run in BobJ, or maybe it's going to be BI is going to run as part of ECC and HANA. Some of those will be considered, that for to be discussed with the customer of what some options are. But this report more focuses on the best practice from SAP of what has to be looked at, things that have to be remediated. For example, the code that has to be reviewed, Z objects that may not be supported or may not work in HANA. That's going to be listed in for consideration to be checked. So our hope is that we can intelligently inform a customer that they can see how far out of migration might be, or how much labor is going to be involved to get the system prepared to move to HANA. So that's not only from a platform standpoint, but also from the code and some of the configuration. So the other part about the assessment I didn't mention is about the assessment around the benchmarking. An area that we're keenly working on now is the estimation of the downtime window that's needed. We can do that. It's going to make a difference if there's a Unicode conversion also as part of this migration, as well as how much prep work has been done ahead of time with this cluster tables, for example. I mentioned before, those alone can take weeks for that job to actually do the conversion. So every system will be a little different. We want to make sure that we're looking at all the options and things that have to be considered before those so systems can be moved and migrated. So it's a lot of preparatory checks that we're running, as well as target system sizing. And I should mention that wherever possible, we're running those SAP standard reports. So there's not a lot of Z code that we're introducing. It's more calling SAP standard reports and pulling that data and analyzing it. So we try to keep the assessment and how it runs very simple for the customer to execute. So a key part that we've seen in a lot of migrations is the communication factor of where the migration, if we're doing a production upgrade migration for a customer, we've seen it where we'll have 4 component systems. We'll have ECC, BI, CRM, SRM. We're migrating all those to HANA over to cloud. And just the management of logistics of getting the information back to the customer becomes a challenge. So what we've built is an automatic feature where it's going to update. Right now we use a product called ConnectWise for our project management. It automatically updates that in our side. So our PMs see project status updates. We can also email the customer so they get automatic updates when the migrations are occurring. So you can see how clearly the screen is coming through, yet you can see the stages. And these stages reflect they match the stages that SAP uses. So for example, you can see the pre-processing phase, which is going to be the synchronization of tables for that uptime phase. The customer is getting real-time updates when the systems are running into those phases. So they don't have to have a PM constantly checking and asking for project updates. They're seeing it real-time when things are running. So our hope is that we could simplify and improve that visibility for the customer of where their migrations are for status. Another part on visibility is around the execution. This is the real-time monitor. So one of the things that we're very interested in keeping an eye on is the performance of how much data is going between that source system and target system. And to have good support and the fastest migration possible, we got to make sure we have a good network connection and speed, that's capable, a big enough pipe that we don't want customers to have to buy a gig connection if not needed, but we want to be able to tell them intelligibly what they need to get to the cloud. And so every migration we built is recording the metrics of how much data is going between the source and target on each phase, depending upon how large the source system size, how many CPUs it has. So we can very intelligibly tell the customer, the gig connection is nice, but you might be paying too much money for this migration. 500 meg might be enough in this instance. So we have all this data. We're recording this so we can accurately predict this for customers. The other thing I'll mention is if someone's done an SAP migration or upgrade, the process itself is pretty complicated to actually monitor and know what work it's doing. And there's many times where it'll get stuck. It could be stuck as long as 12 hours without someone seeing it because the machine will still look like it's busy, but it might be locked, for example, that it's out of space and it's not clearly alerting that that's the problem. So the tool, the main driver, the first driver for the screen was just to make sure that the process is running as normal. So we do checks, a health checkup every layer of the migration on the source and target, as you can see. So you see memory, CPU, any errors in the database on SAP, as well as the migration processes themselves. So it's basically a full health check while the migration is running. So one of the areas we're really excited about, we're working on, is applying machine learning to this auto error correction. So, for example, when an error occurs in FlexBridge, it's intelligible enough that it's gonna pick out the error and record it into a database, into a knowledge base. When we figure out the solution, for example, we ran into an error recently where SAP had a new version of the upgrade tool, and it had incompatibility with the Java machine version. So we had to upgrade the Java machine to fix the problem. So we upgraded the knowledge base with that issue. And so the next time when we ran into the migration, it automatically knows it has to run the new version of the Java machine and provides that for the upgrade. So we're continually, for every migration we run for all customers, it's automatically updating the errors that we run into. And where possible, it's going to automatically provide that error correction. It's not always possible. Sometimes it's, apply an OSS note. The correction will say the OSS note, but some of these steps have to be manually applied. So where it's possible, where it makes sense, we fully automate it. Otherwise, we bring the information with the fix. So the end point is reduces the risk because you're getting the fixes, right at the beginning of what has to be applied, as well as it's minimizing, that end-to-end runtime for the migration. So the other part here is the reporting aspect of summary, last piece. So it's a summary of the migration itself, what versions of the database and operating system were enabled, and then the SAP software components. And then we this will be provided. This report we use for all the incremental, so the copy prods, the devs. So we learn to prep the production as best as possible. Then you also will get the summary report for all the migrations at the end, which is the prod. So you'll have the timings for all. And this we use this continually to make the next migration for the next customer even better. So it's something that we continue to refine and improve.
Hey Pat, just a quick question here from a viewer. It's actually a question that has two components in it. The first component is, does FlexBridge require some software installed on production systems? Is there some licensing considerations that come into play? And the second part of the question is, what kind of access rights does Protera require to perform a FlexBridge migration?
Good stuff. So foremost, the licensing, the cost, or what needs to be installed. So today we have a Z program. It's a Z function module that gets to be provided as a transport, and we can even provide if a customer has concerns about what that contains, we could happy to show the contents or documentation, what all the objects are. They would install that into the system for just for their own security and their compliance processes, to put in a sandbox first. They import that, and then there's a Z program that runs all the analysis, and it is going to dump an output into spool requests, and then that automatically gets sent back to Protera. If they don't allow emails to go out from that system for whatever reason, they can, they could save those files off and send them to us. That's just fine. But it's raw data. The customer has access to all the data that's created, these reports, so they can see exactly what we're retrieving. So to answer the question, it's a Z object function module with a program that runs those. That's what kicks off the analysis. And then from the standpoint of licensing, they're to do the very best option to minimize downtime next to nothing, right, to minutes. There's a technology by SAP called SLT. And for the companies that we've used this for, it's always been part of their license agreement. I don't know definitively if all customers get that. My understanding is it's part of the TDMS suite of tools. And I think SAP's bundling that license many times in with the ECC system. So we can certainly, for a specific customer, that this is something we could find out. We haven't run into an instance where customers had to buy that. And that is to get to the, let's say, minutes of downtime outage. Without SLT, we probably could still get down to, let's say, 4 or 6 hours of outage. So the very best case scenario, we would go SLT, and we'd have to see the licensing costs from SAP if there is any. Typically, there isn't. That's what we've run into. And then for the licensing, so that I think there was licensing. The migration itself is a service, so we just price it as per instance. So there's no cost for the software itself. It's the service to deliver a migration per instance. And then for security, I think the second part of that question was, to answer that is, the tool for FlexBridge is going to need to be able to be called from the internet. So our preference would be that we would set up a site-to-site connection, a secure network. So that's part of what we call security. We need to have that network connection there. The FlexBridge product is available on the internet, obviously a secure connection, from Protera. So we would foremost set up the VPN, and then we would need access to an ID that can run the SAP migration processes, which are their standard SAP programs, which we would provide, but they need to run with a SID admin like, or it may even be root. I think SID admin might be required only. Some customers have given us root just because, but SID admin rights to run that process. And that would be it from a security standpoint.
Thank you, Patrick. I think you covered the two components of the question here. I do not see any additional questions right now, so
okay. Thank you.
Then move on.
Yeah, we only got really 2 more slides, and so we're coming to the end. So you know, you can see those again. We're trying to reduce the things that are bad and improve the things that are good. So we're continuing to improve the assessment's a big focus to make this as smart and as easy to run for customers. We continue to improve that, as well as the machine learning. That's an exciting area, just neat technology in general for computers and where the industry's going. So we're excited to keep working on that part, just to make the migrations run with less errors. So it brings us up to the case study here. So we just went live with a customer running FlexBridge to do their migration. That is an ECC 6.0 system. They have, it's a worldwide global company. Here, I don't know if we have it on the slide. I'm not seeing it. Their footprint was 700 gig for that source system, and I don't see it on here. And then it went down to about 250 gigs. So it's about ratio of what is that? About 30% that we were able to go down to on the footprint of the system. This fit in at the time. X1 wasn't live yet. This fit into the R3 8X large, so it was a 226 gig size system. It fit in there just fine. It's running very, very well. See the cost, the solution. You see that if you see that last section there with the results, migrations originally was running in 3 days without FlexBridge. We got that down to 3 hours for the downtime portion, and then the simplified IT landscape, which is really interesting because going to HANA, it seems like there's a big, big understanding that, it's going to be more complicated to run that. What was really surprising about this customer is that they end up doing no end user training. When they did the migration to HANA, their end users didn't see any change in the GUI. So their day-to-day ops were the same for, they didn't have to retrain their people to go to HANA, yet they saw all the improvements in job performance and the real-time analytics and HANA Live, some of the capabilities that HANA provides them. So it was quite a shock alert to the company that they reaped the benefit of HANA without having to retrain their whole staff. So it was a very neat story. And they're running the SUSE new version 12. We're running a prototype on the testing of the patching there right now. So have an update on that one soon. So the last slide here is, it's an offering. This complements a SUSE and AWS to do a free POC. And this POC would include that assessment. It would include that migration, and then running 60 days operation, in the cloud with real prod data. So very exciting offering here that a customer can kick the tires on HANA, on AWS, and running a SUSE in the cloud, and and see if it works for their company. So I encourage you to take a look at that offering. You can click on any of those links that's here. We have a microsite on FlexBridge you can see there, as well as Amazon has on their marketplace. You can contact them for the demo, as well as I believe SUSE also has it on their website. So any of those avenues, if those don't work for you, you can contact Christian. He will certainly know where to go.
I'm certainly happy to help with that. Certainly happy. Hey, interesting slide. Not that the previous slides weren't, but I'm surprised I got 5 questions at the same time here.
Right.
On the same topic, which is how about the licensing for HANA if I don't have the licenses? This is what the viewers are. I mean, all 5 of them, or 5 of the viewers are asking, how does the licensing work for this POC from a HANA standpoint?
Yeah, so we have, depending upon the volume of it, we have some licenses that we use, for, I'm not sure if it would go in the dozens, but we could certainly use it for a smaller sample, and time them. For longer term, AWS does have some, I think, I can't remember, I should know this. I think BI, they have a demo license that is free for 60 days. I don't know at the top of my head what component system that's for. So we can certainly get an answer for that. I would hate that this would be something that would stop a demo. So if a customer is not licensed for it, we could certainly also reach back to the AWS sales team. We have worked with the gentleman that works on the HANA Innovation Group that wants to bring new stories, customer adoption. This would be something you'd be certainly interested to help with. So if a customer is not licensed already, I would, like I said, I would hate that to be a barrier for a company not to be able to try this POC.
So in summary, it's a bring your own license model, so that customers interested in this offer would bring their own licenses if they have them. If not, Protera or AWS can help with temporary demo licenses.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Good summary. So yeah, so bring customers that are interested, and do our very best to make something work, so they can kick the tires on the solution. I think that's it for the slides. So if there's any other questions, we can hit them. We got, I think, about 7 minutes left.
Yeah, I'm just looking at the Q&A and chat box here. I do not see any other questions. I think, Patrick, you have been very detailed in presenting this FlexBridge service for the migration of SAP workloads to HANA and to AWS. So thank you for that. Sounds like you answered most of the questions or covered all bases in the presentation. And the questions we had, actually, we covered during the presentation.
Yeah, if anything on the licensing, we'll certainly review that. And I know the page in AWS, and there is a few offerings there. So we'll review that. And do we have the people to follow back up with, Christian?
Absolutely, and we will send out a copy of the presentation of the deck to all the viewers.
Wonderful.
So you will find all this information there. So Patrick, if this is the last slide, I think this concludes our presentation for today. So thank you to all the viewers. Thank you, Pat, for this great presentation. Thank you to all the viewers for attending today. We have another webinar coming up in a week. That one will more specifically talk to the benefits of leveraging AWS to streamline SAP operations. So mainly leveraging AWS to reduce cost and complexity of SAP operations. That one is scheduled for next Thursday, actually, so you will probably receive an invite to that one. Pat will be the presenter again for that presentation, so we certainly invite you to attend and share the link with colleagues in your respective organizations who might be interested. So thank you again. As Patrick mentioned, if you have further questions concerning this proof of concept offer, please use one of the links on the slide here, or feel free to reach out directly to me. If you have some additional questions that come up later concerning Patrick's presentation, please feel free to use the contact us form or reach out directly to myself. So with this, we wish you a great rest of your day, and look forward, to answering any further questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you.